Good evening, everyone. My name is Derek Webb. I'm the Vice President of the Men of Excellence Club. Thank you for joining us tonight for Stepping in Activism, a conversation with Yusef Salaam. For over a year now, the Student Society for Bridging Diversity, Men of Excellence, Black Student Union, Women of Power, Scientists Embracing Equality and Diversity, Latinx Student Organization, and Art for Activism have worked together to improve the Springfield College experience for BIPOC students. We've hosted conversations about discrimination in healthcare, race and policing, and even made formal demands to the president. One of our demands was an increase in multicultural funding. This resulted in a new $50,000 multicultural fund being created, which helped make this event and many others this semester possible. We hope this conversation with Dr. Salaam will encourage our campus community to keep the conversation going and to continue making change at the college. Special thank you to President Cooper and David McMahon for making this event happen. And with that, I'll kick it to SSBD's Public Relations Officer and President-elect Nia Greenidge.
Thank you, Derek. Good evening, everybody. My name is Nia Greenidge. I am currently Public Relations and future President of SSBD. It was slightly over a year ago when Kayla Flynn, a recent graduate, and I had a series program showing When They See Us, and the conversation began of bringing Dr. Salaam to speak on our campus. This year, working with all the student clubs and offices sponsoring this event, we were able to bring this to life. Tonight, I have the esteemed pleasure to introduce Dr. Yusef Salaam, entrepreneur, author, educator, and leader. On April 19th, 1989, just about 32 years ago to the day, a young woman was brutally raped and left for dead in New York City Central Park. 5 boys, 4 Black, 1 Latino, were tried and convicted of the crime in a case that rocked the city and country. They became known collectively as the Central Park 5. Over a decade later, after spending years of their lives behind bars, the 5 men had their cases vacated. The unidentified DNA in the case, unlinked to any of the 5, had finally been connected to its owner, a convicted murderer and serial rapist who confessed to the crime. The convictions of the boys, now men, were overturned and they were exonerated. One of those boys, our speaker tonight, was just 15 years old when his life changed forever. Since his release, Yusef Salaam has committed himself to advocating and educating people on the issues of false confessions, police brutality and disparities in the America's criminal justice system, press ethics and bias, race and law. For his activism and education, Mr. Salaam was awarded an honorary doctorate and received the President's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016 from President Barack Obama. He was appointed to the Board of Innocence Project in 2018 and has released a Netflix featured limited series called When They See Us, based on the true story of the Central Park 5. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Yusef Salaam, who will share a couple of words, and Ms. Jasmine Hastings, current Senior and Secretary of SSBD and BSU, who will be leading the questions for tonight.
Good evening again, Dr. Salaam. Thank you for joining us here tonight.
Thank you for having me. It is definitely an honor and a pleasure to be here. Yes, indeed.
So the first topic that we were interested in finding out about was, before being arrested for this crime that you did not commit, what was your experience and your history with law enforcement and the justice system?
You know, it's interesting because to have an experience that is different in many ways, that is innocent, that is void of anything that we see on social media, is what my experience with law enforcement was like. It was the idea that America was equal, that it was fair, that the officers that walked around my neighborhood, and they did that often back in the days, they knew our names. They called us by our names, and sometimes, I would see them and I'm perhaps say hi. Hey, how you doing, Mr. Officer? And my mother would pop my hand. And it was one of those moments where you couldn't understand what was really going on. Now, I got to tell you, my mother was raised in the Jim Crow South, and she told us that often. She was raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And she would tell us often that she was raised in the Jim Crow South. And in my mind, and I speak about this in my new book, Better Not Bitter, coming out in May. In my mind, I'm like, but Ma, we in New York. It's okay. Everything is good. I didn't know that we were up south. I didn't know until I was 15 and introduced to what Dr. Malcolm X would call the American nightmare. I didn't know that it existed. And so my thoughts were that police officers were there, just like on the side of cop cars in New York, we see the words, and actually this is throughout the nation, we see the words to serve and protect. I thought that that's what their job was. I thought that the idea of policing in America was to assist people, to stop crimes, to make sure that everybody gets a fair chance. I didn't know that it was almost the exact opposite. And to be awakened to that kind of nightmare was unfortunate, but it was a necessity, I think, that was needed in order to make sure that you realized that the color of your skin is what is always being judged and not the content of your character. People see you before they really see you. And by them seeing you, they make assumptions. Oh, Trayvon Martin has a hoodie on. He must be a thug. He must be up to no good. Mike Brown grew in size at the wording as the description of the officer who shot him down. He turned into this monster-like figure and grew in size right in front of my face. And you look at the officer, you say, what are you talking about? You look like you could have taken on a whole bunch of different Mike Browns, But the wording and the language is, I feared for my life. It's the code that gives them the magic key that allows us to see so many of our brothers and sisters who have been murdered by the police, so many of the human family who have not, in the duality of America, the America where you can go into a church, shoot up the whole church, get captured alive, and be taken to dinner before you go to jail. People were looking at the Chauvin trial, and I think one of the things that they were sighing, and they breathed a sigh of relief when the judge said, remanded, he's going to be held until sentencing. Because usually what happens in the other communities, in the communities where they have the complexion for acceptance, they tell you things like, hey, listen, so his sentencing is in 2 weeks, right? In this particular case, they said, remand, he's not going nowhere. But they usually say, hey, listen, come back in 2 weeks. Actually, come back in a month. Go on vacation, have a good time, eat some great food, create great memories, but don't have us looking for you now. Come on back. Unheard of in the black and brown community. Unheard of. But the thing about it is that we all have eyes, but often we don't always see the same thing. We all have ears, but we often don't hear the same thing. It's the greatest trick that has been played. And part of that trick is what we call in the black and brown community, tricknology. It's through tricknology that you say to yourself, oh, I can take that medication because look at the people who are taking the medication, having a great time. I always tell people, if you really want to know the truth, especially when ads come on TV prior to COVID-19, close your eyes and listen to the ad. Don't look at the ad, because two things are happening. One is your eyes are playing a trick on you, and you don't hear what the announcer is saying very fast. Right? But if you close your eyes and you listen, you'll hear, if you take this medicine, you could die. As a matter of fact, if you take this medicine, you could lose all of the limbs of your body. I mean, it's not like you seeing the person playing frisbee, having a great time, walking their dog, having a good time. And you didn't even realize that at the very bottom of the screen, it said actor portrayals. So I'm saying all of this to say that my introduction to what could have been a life of innocence was disrupted at 15. It was disrupted in the worst way, but in the greatest way at the same time. You know, I found out that you don't get put on you more than you can bear. And instead of cursing God out, saying, why me? I was able to look at this situation and say, what am I supposed to do? Why am I chosen for this?
Thank you for that. So you did mention how it was growing up for you in New York compared to how your mother grew up down south, but you were a teenager in the 80s when things like The Cosby Show debuted and became a staple and a positive example in the Black community. But there were also things like crack and other drugs that were harming the Black community and causing problems as well. So what was it like for you growing up as a Black teenager in the 80s and seeing these things around you?
You know, when you grow up in hell, and I'm calling it that on purpose, right? Hell on earth, right? Not real hell, hell on earth. Meaning the totality of the conditions that are heaped upon you in order to produce a result. And that result is to keep you defined in the box that they have placed you in, right? It is to come out of your building, to come out of your tenement, to come out of your project, code name for experiment, and to go and play would mean that in the Black and brown community, I mean, we've seen pictures and I swear it almost looks like war-torn areas around the world, but it's America. And you would see young Black children, young Latino children playing in abandoned lots, broken lots with buildings that were dilapidated. Some of them are still there. They were dilapidated. You couldn't go in, but there was no sign saying do not enter for health reasons and safety reasons. Sometimes you would see mattresses that would have coils seen protruding out of the mattress. We would drink from water faucets. Same water faucets that if you looked at them today, you would say to yourself, ooh, there was rust on our water faucets. Crack vials, specifically the tops of the crack vials, which identified the type of the company, right? So now I'm gonna say company because we think about the shift that America has made, especially with marijuana. There's a shift, and now these are businesses, these are companies. People are they're the people who have been run over by the spike wheels of justice yesterday will not be able to participate. Some of them have lost their lives, but the people who are participating today get the opportunity to become multi-millionaires, if not billionaires, for the same thing that they penalized Black and brown communities with. And so in our communities, there was an influx, there was a flood of what would look like Skittles, like somebody just threw out some Skittles on the floor. That's how the crack vials looked. And you would see people, you know, high on drugs. And in the communities, we created the term wilding, but wilding wasn't what they took. They took the term, they gave it a definition, and then they placed it back on Black and brown people and made people fear Black and brown people even more. They created ideas that they said that Black and brown people are getting younger and younger and younger. These are super terrorists, super predators. These are urban terrorists. You should be afraid. We forget Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We are seeing the reaction. It was said that nobody has drugs growing in their backyard. And I'm talking about real drugs. I'm talking about like the poppy fields and the cocoa leaves and all of that stuff. We don't see that stuff grown in our backyards. Nobody's manufacturing guns in our backyards. So one, how are the guns coming in? And two, how are the drugs coming in? We get a glimpse into that truth by looking at the great works from John Singleton, God bless his soul, through Snowfall. But the movie script of life being stranger than the truth, the government, this came in through the government. This was to offset black and brown bodies. The war on drugs that is now the opioid epidemic. Things have changed, but why? Things have changed because it trickled over into other communities. And when it trickled over into other communities in the same way that black and brown bodies needed help, there was a war heaped upon black and brown people. But they opened the Betty Ford clinics of the world for people who they thought had lives worth saving.
You made some really good points about that. The next thing that we wanted to address was, who was someone that you considered a mentor, someone who you looked up to growing up or even now, just as that positive figure for you going forward in your life?
Wow. My mentors were people like my uncle. And I mention him specifically because I didn't have a father growing up. I had a father, but my father passed away in 2015. I hadn't seen him since I was 4 years old. But the absence of my father was never really truly felt in our community, in our home, because my mother, in her strength, she always made us like we never felt the lack of our father being there. She taught us everything that we needed to know. My mother was a professor at Parsons University, and she's my greatest hero, Shiro, because the types of things that she did with her life, right? Young person growing up in Alabama, coming to New York City, becoming a professor at one of the most prestigious institutions for fashion, graduating from Fashion Institute of Technology, going into something that she loved, and then having to be fired from that, never to work again, because of the accusations in the Central Park Jogger case. People would show up at her job and they would be on the bullhorn, police officers in particular would be on their bullhorn, and they would say, "That's her right there." They would follow her to the train station. "That's her right there. The BITCH, the mother of the dog, Yusef Salaam." Imagine that. Every day she went to work, until finally the people she worked for called her into the office and said, "Listen, we got to let you go." My mother never worked another day in her life. 32 years ago, she never worked another day in her life. I remember making some remarks the other day. We were supposed to be at the Capitol, and I was talking about the lawsuits, and I was saying how, we sued after 13 years passed and the truth came out in 2002. By the way, we sued the city. We sued everybody involved. There was immunity with people who hated us. We sued them anyway. We wanted to sue Donald Trump. But unfortunately, what they told us, according to the law, there's this thing called statute of limitations. And I think the statute of limitations specifically for certain crimes should never be expired. Right? There's a statute of limitation for rape. That's one of the most atrocious crimes, one of the most heinous crimes that's only trumped by child molestation. If 7 years and a day goes by and a real perpetrator comes forward and says, "Hey, I'm the one who did that," they will never be able to be charged. That law, that statute needs to be revisited. I have 7 daughters. I have a wife. I have a mother. I have a sister. I look at, and I've been taught from my faith, that you should look at every woman as if she is your mother, your sister, or your daughter. Imagine the level of respect. You look at every man as if he is your father, your brother, or your son. The dynamics of respect are different when you see people in a holistic way, right? But in terms of the role models, you know, I could wake up every day in my house and go to my library that my mother had and learn about everything going on in the world. There were books about Greeks, there were books about Africa, there were books about everything, right? Back in the days, there was a saying that I heard again when I was in prison. And the saying in prison that I remembered was, one who reads will always succeed because there's not too much that they don't know. They hide things in books, right? I tell people all the time, this is not a smartphone. We need to change the language to understand that this is not a smartphone. This is a phone. What you do with it makes it smart. I'm not saying that you should be a square and not, play games, check social media out, post things. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying part of your time needs to be spent constructively doing things that will elevate you as opposed to tear you down. And so as you can imagine from what I'm saying, my greatest inspiration, greatest example is definitely my mother, definitely my uncle, in that he allowed me to participate almost as a son with everything that he did with his son. And that was important. That was powerful. Learning how to swim because he took us to the pool and showed us how to swim. Showing us how to fight, until I finally learned how to fight more after my mother took us and sent my cousin, myself, my sister, brother to one of the top instructors in New York to learn jujitsu. But the role models, I think, is interesting too, because they keep on coming. I think the more you find that you're looking for a role model, the more you'll figure out that the best role models are individuals who have already left this world. But their works are what keeps them around, keeps their spirit alive, allows you to understand, well, damn, what would Dr. King do? And then you can move by doing the research and understanding. He's walking with you. He's talking to you. He's giving you advice. Very important.
So you mentioned a lot of things about holistic ideas and holistic practices. So do you feel that you developed those beliefs and thinkings after your arrest, or do you feel like you had those instilled in you from before?
So, it's interesting because I always knew who I was, and I always knew that I had these types of things inside of me, but they were seeds. They hadn't yet blossomed. And so to be around my grandmother, who was very regal, she was our Cicely Tyson, just to give you an idea of how regal she was. When she spoke, everybody said, hold on, shh, shh, shh. We would listen. Later on in life, she had multiple strokes, so she lost the ability to speak. But she wrote me. And when she wrote me, she addressed me as Master Yusef Salaam. I never got an opportunity to thank her, for one, and also interrogate her about why. But I want you to think about something. Every single inmate prior to, well, actually probably every single inmate still, because even now they probably screen everything. But as your mail is screened, as your mail is being fondled, somebody else is looking through it, somebody else is reading it, somebody else is looking at your photos, the photos that the loved ones sent to you. Sometimes these photos could be a little racy. I'll say it from that perspective, and I'll let your mind use your own imagination to imagine what that raciness looks like. But I never didn't receive my mail. So imagine an officer picking up this letter and saying, oh, this is to Master Yusef Salaam. Hey, we got another one to Master Yusef Salaam, y'all. Well, read it to us. Start reading the letter. Okay. And I get the letter. In her infinite wisdom, I truly believe that she was, for one, telling them who I was. They didn't know who they had. And she was reminding me who I was. Perhaps I didn't know who I was or who I had. You know, learning about meditation, which is a great, I don't even know how to describe meditation in a way that is simple. It's a great tool. It is a liberating tool. It is a thing that allows you to be in a place and yet not be there. I remember sitting on the stage with the rest of my brothers, and Oprah Winfrey turned to me and she said, Yusef, how did you make it through? And I said, I meditated. I didn't really go into an elaborate discussion about what that meant, but what I knew was that when you meditate, wherever your mind goes, your body follows. In prison, you don't have the ability to have incense burning, white noise playing in the background, great meditation music playing. No, you are walking down the corridor to the mess hall with killers, some of them looking at you, wanting to do things to you. Officers with tattoos of black and brown babies with nooses around their neck, looking at you, wanting to do something to you. And you have to meditate through that. You have to meditate. Wherever your mind goes, your body follows. It is the other idea of being able to marry high science with practical needs. And so when I tell people about concepts like Sankofa, I'm telling them about something that is very important, because the concept of Sankofa means that you have to turn and go back and get something that you left, right? And when you think about sacred DNA, specifically mitochondria DNA, the DNA that comes through the mother, the DNA that shows the link all the way back for all the people that have been born, the link all the way back to the original woman that gave birth, right? That mtDNA, the sacredness of it, allows you to tap into a spirituality and a reality that you don't realize yet. It is the movie The Matrix. Once somebody says, you think that's water you drinking? You think that's air you breathing? You in the Matrix. But how do we know this? We know this because Dr. James Baldwin, he said a few things. But one of the things that impressed me and was most important, he said that if you're African American, you are African without memory and American without privilege. To be African American, he said, and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage all the time. How do you move? Knowing the truth, understanding the truth. How do you fight the war that is more mental than physical? Right? It's all of those things. But the thing about it that's so important is tapping into a higher vibration that allows you to elevate yourself in such a way that whatever they put upon you, if they put harm upon you, it turns into nurturing, right? They cut you with a razor, and they don't realize that life is shaping and chiseling you into becoming the survivor of the fittest. Everything that happens for you, everything that happens, and I said that incorrect, everything that happens to you is happening for you. Everything, all of us, everything that happens to you is happening for you. It's the difference between going through something and growing through something. When you look back, you say to yourself, damn, I was walking through hell. And like has been said, I had to keep on walking in order to get out of there. And I may have had to create a path that was never there before in order to tell people how to go free. It's a beauty in that. It's a resilience in that. Because you have to remind yourself all along the way. You can never not remind yourself. You have to be able to take what a modern day philosopher like Cardi B says, right? Knock me down 9 times, I'll get up 10. You have to be able to take that. You have to be able to understand that my friend, my mentor, Les Brown, he said it's not a matter of if you fall in life, but when you fall. He said, try to land on your back. The other day I said, damn, well, what happens when you land on your face? The pain, the agony. Once you get over the pain and the agony, turn over. Get yourself together and pull yourself up. And you might fall again. But in the times where you've fallen, you got to remember that you got up the first time. I'm not saying you got up the last time. I'm saying you got to remember that you got up the first time. Because the first time is the thing that defines you. It's the thing that lets you know that I can get up again. It's the thing that makes you say to yourself, I want to see what it's like the next time I try and fail so that I can try again. It's a certain spiritual sense that goes on with that. That elevation, that thing, it tells you, and this is like me being up on the case, and then me looking at the case, me understanding the case, me uncovering the case, me defining the case, me saying to myself, oh shucks. The Central Park jogger case is not what most people think it is. This case, the worst thing that could have happened to us, is actually a love story between God and his people. It's a story of how a people can be buried alive and forgotten. The system forgets that we are seeds. It's a story about a criminal system of injustice turned on its side in order to produce a miracle in modern time. This story is a story of resilience. Yes, there are players in the story. There's white supremacy in the story. There's white male dominance in the story. There's racism in the story. But when you look back and you realize what this story is, those things that people have accepted as hate is really you battling spiritual wickedness in high and low places. Those people, you're not fighting those people. You're fighting the energy that they have taken upon themselves and garnered with their hearts and said, I like that. And so they become the embodiment of what's the brother name that just came home from prison? They say he was making rap songs about how he was killing his victims and stuff like that. And he was under investigation, Bobby Smurder, you know. The people who really are murderers, they desire to see how he twirled when he dropped. They like that. And they have badges. And they have guns. And if they come upon one of their own, they capture them alive. But you could be Breonna Taylor laying in your bed and be awakened to the American nightmare. Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Sean Bell going to his groom's party, about to be married the next day, and be awakened to the American nightmare. Amadou Diallo, Kenneth Chamberlain Sr., Emmett Till. you could be Kunta Kinte and be awakened to the American nightmare.
Thank you for that. So a lot of things are going on right now and have been going on for years. And as you can see, there are a lot more recordings of things, but the system hasn't changed. It's just getting reported more. But what is your advice on how to cope for individuals who have gone through and are still going through similar traumatic experiences with the police and the justice system?
My first advice is to know that God is just. And I'm saying that for a very intentional and specific reason. I know there's people that don't believe in God and, all of that, but I want you to know that there is a creator, and that creator is a just creator. There are people who have done some of the worst atrocities that you could imagine. We've heard about the Third Reich. We've never heard about the Second Reich. We've never heard about the First Reich. We've heard about all of these atrocities, but we forget about individuals in history like King Leopold. It's crazy to think about it from those perspectives, because these things that happen historically, they're to remove you from your own sense of self-worth, your own idea of psychosocially mattering. I remember somebody said to me once, they said, Yusef, most people have died a long time ago. They gave up on their dreams, they gave up on their hopes and all their aspirations. They have pulled over to the side of the highway of life. They don't even got their blinkers on, because blinkers signify that they need help. We have the awesome opportunity to take life and remember that when our mother and father got together, all of us were one of over 400 million options. That's 400 million options. And we made it. So that means that we were born on purpose. And if we were born on purpose, then we have to know that we have a purpose. And in the purpose, we have to remember the words of Dr. King. Dr. King said, when you find your purpose in life, do it as if God himself called you to do it at this very moment. And instead of giving us a grand idea of what that could be in the Black and brown community, maybe the next Barack Obama, maybe Big Ben. Some folks may not know Big Ben was a black man. That clock in London, yeah, he created that. I mean, he said that if your purpose in life is to be a street sweeper, sweep the streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep the streets, he said, like Beethoven composed music, like Leoton Price sang before the opera. Remember who you are, and then turn up your light. Never allow your dreams, your hopes, your aspirations to be pushed to the someday aisle. They say the most wealthiest place on earth is the graveyard. It's not in Saudi Arabia where there's oil. It's not in Africa where there's diamonds and gold. It's in the graveyard where people's hopes, dreams, and aspirations have gone to die. They said, someday I'll get to that, and that someday never came. They take it all with them. We have the awesome opportunity to give it all and then give some more. So I might have gotten just a little bit off of topic with the question. Sorry.
That was fine. That was completely great. Thank you so much. but I am going to start transitioning to the audience's Q&A, and I'm going to pass it to Paris Lizana right now. But I am personally have been touched and impacted by this conversation, and I thank you so much for answering my questions. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Salaam, for answering all of our questions with so much grace and humility and purpose. I think we've all heard a word tonight, and we all appreciate you being here and sharing. I'll answer one of the first questions that haven't been touched upon. This question is from Ocean Eversley, and she wants to know, what can citizens do to help innocent inmates or wrongfully convicted people?
I think that we have to do everything that we can to humanize them, right? We look at the work that an organization like the Innocence Project is doing, who's been around for about 32 years now. I think they were created after the Central Park Jogger case. People are on death row. People are languishing in prison, sometimes for crimes that they have not committed, sometimes for crimes that they have committed. But what I want people to understand is that we live in a country that is very punitive. And in penalizing people, we want to be able to penalize them over and over and over again in this country. But this is a young nation. This is a nation prior to slavery. I'm sorry, after slavery, probably prior to slavery too, right? We were imported against our will, those of us who have lineage with the slave trade on the other side. And then there's the other part, people who have immigrated to this country. Those who have immigrated to this country from somewhere else, the prison industrial complex in their countries is one of the most pristine, I'm sure, when it comes to how they humanize and deal with people who have made a mistake. It is what the prisons used to be called in America, the correctional facilities, where you went to some place to get a behavior corrected after you have made an infraction, to pay your debt back to society. That's what that is all about, right? In America, they don't have that. And so I encourage people, those of us who have family that's in prison, write them. Even if it's just, hey, I was just thinking about you. Send them photographs. Pictures tell 1,000 words. The story of a picture is beautiful because all we see is the prison walls. And we might see the sky. We don't get the opportunity to be in our neighborhoods anymore. Take pictures of the neighborhood, send it to your loved ones. You don't even have to say anything. Pictures of neighborhood, send it to your loved ones. It'll warm their heart. You know, for people who have been returned citizens, the type of support that we need is unimaginable. You can do the time, or you can let time do you. Unfortunately, a lot of people let time do them. And even if you're doing time, you still come out of that war with post-traumatic stress syndrome. You still come out of the womb of America with all kinds of ills that you didn't even know you had. Things that you have to begin to work on, improve, cut out, figure out, change. And so we need social scientists to be able to stand up and step up to the plate and be able to understand and define and codify and create a safe space for individuals who have paid their debt to society, whether they were doing time or doing time for crimes that they committed or doing someone else's time like myself and my brothers. To be able to be welcomed back into the world and be given the opportunity to be gainfully employed is important. And even for folks who haven't been convicted of crimes, we need a better living wage. We need first of all, we need a living wage. We don't need minimum wage. We need a living wage that gives people the opportunity to live at the bare minimum, right? It's important, like all of those things, all of the ways that we can help and shape. And I probably haven't even spoken about half of them. I might have even just scratched the surface. But giving people the ability to breathe, to be reacclimated into society. My mother gave me things before I went to prison that helped me tremendously. By her telling me that they needed me to participate in whatever it was that they were trying to do. And she reminded me not to participate, to refuse. It's important. It's super important. Because not only do you go in with what you came with, you leave with sometimes less than that. And you have to remind yourself who you are. You have to remind yourself what this whole thing is about. I wrote a poem in my book of poetry, Words of a Man, My Right to Be. And in this poem, it's called War. No, I'm sorry, it's called Heartbeat. Heartbeat. We are at war, the bulk of which will not be physical, the bulk of which is mental. Psychological warfare to make me accept you as better, like your ice is cooler or water wetter. Holding court in the streets, this time court will be sweet. We will not accept defeat. The signal will be your heartbeat. Yeah.
Wow, truly amazing. Thank you for that. We have another question from Kayla Flynn, and she wants to know, how was your healing process, and have you forgiven the person who the person who actually did commit the crime?
Wow. I've actually never been asked if I've ever forgiven the person who actually committed the crime. That's my first time being asked that. I've always been asked, have I forgiven Donald Trump? But I remember listening to the real perpetrator of the crime, and I remember him talking about how he did what he did and why he did what he did. And he heard about us getting arrested, and he said he thought he got away with the perfect crime. The problem was that he is really a criminal. And so because they didn't catch him, he was out there committing more crime. One of his last victims, not his last victim, but one of his last victims was a young pregnant Latina woman. And I remember him talking about him coming into her home brandishing a knife. And she pleaded with him, can you allow me just to put my children in the next room? And he allowed her to do so. And I'm thinking that in her mind, she probably said to herself, man, this is going to be terrible, but I'm going to survive. And he raped her. And his MO was that he would take your eyes or your life because he didn't want you to be able to identify him in the court of law had you survived. And at the very end of his crime spree, he was killing all of his victims. And so he stabbed her to death. And she began to cry out and cry out and cry out. And the people in the building that she was being raped in came out of their homes and they jumped on this monster until the police came. They held him until the police came. That's how he got caught. He didn't get caught because the police caught him. He got caught because the tenants in the building, they stepped up and did the right thing. And so 13 years go by and he tells the truth. And I'm thankful and I'm grateful, but I never thought about forgiveness as it relates to him. What I do know is that if you don't forgive, the pain, the pain that you went through, the anger that you went through turns into a bitterness. And I'm reminded of the words of my great teacher, Dr. Maya Angelou, where she says, you should be angry, but you must not be bitter. She says, bitterness is like a cancer. It eats upon the host. It doesn't do anything to the object of its displeasure. And then she teaches us the magic. She teaches us how to make alchemy, how to become alchemists. She says, use that anger. You dance it. You march it. You vote it. She said, you do everything about it. And then she said, you talk it. Never stop talking it. James Baldwin again. He said, the victim who was able to articulate the situation of the victim has ceased to be the victim. He or she has become a threat. And I think about us being victims in this case, right? There was the victim herself, and then there was the 5 who were victimized and made into the pariahs, criminalized into being these people that the whole world thought we did it. But now we have taken back our words. We've been able to articulate the situation. And now we are a light shining in the darkness, showing the way. So some of what goes on, especially when I'm up on stage and I'm talking to people here virtually, same type of dynamic, is that this becomes a therapy session for me. It allows me to get the collective embrace from the community again, to let me know that psychosocially I matter, that I'm needed, that I'm wanted, right? And there's growth and there's development and there's process, there's worth, all in that. And it's a never ending cycle, because it's not like you finish, right? You got to remember Khalif Browder. Khalif Browder was in prison for 3 years. They kept trying to get him to cop out to a crime that he didn't commit. Finally, they said, man, well, let's just let him go. They let him go. Jay-Z was able to make a documentary about him, trying to give him his life back. And he couldn't turn off the trauma. And he ended up killing himself. Couldn't turn it off.
Thank you. I believe we have time for one last short question before we close today. And we have a similar question coming from multiple attendees. They want to know, the question is, today the Supreme Court ruled that teens can be sentenced to life without parole again. This is from Susan Joel, and she says, it just seems like we're headed backwards in this area. How should we make sense of this?
Oh my goodness. Wow. I did not know that. I think that what we have to remember is we have never been out of this game that's been played. We're playing the tango. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 8 steps back. We get shot to instill fear in us as a people, so that we can get shot tomorrow again. That's what happens. That's why black and brown bodies are being murdered. And then if we're not being shot, we, through technology again, there goes that word, right? Technology shows up in the black and brown community when you poll the life expectancy of a person in the margins of society and you ask them, what's your life expectancy? What do you think about life? What's going on? They'll tell you things like, man, we're going to be dead or in jail before we reach the age of 21. I'm so saddened when I hear that, because I came from that, right? But I'm so saddened when I hear that, because I realized that when I was in a classroom once, junior high school students, I said, I want you to think about something, and I want you to answer this question for me. Can anyone in this room raise their hand who physically wrote out a plan for themselves and decided that they want to check out by the time they turn 21? Nobody raises their hand. So how is it that we have accepted this seed, this rotten seed, to be planted in our community? Well, we believe it. We believe that we're going to be dead or in jail before we reach the age of 21. And then we perpetuate that amongst ourselves. Why and how? I talk about it in my book, but a short answer is that poverty is a crime that has been placed upon black and brown bodies. Because when you are in a poverty mindset, you begin to turn into a situation where you're struggling all the time. What happens when you struggle in war? Anything you would do when it was the crack wars, the people who had been given crack, you would come home and the faucets off of your sink would be gone, just so that they can get a $5 high. The TV in your home, back in the days, TVs wasn't like the TVs we have now. We got flat screen TVs that you could lift up with your fingers. You had to call in your brothers, your uncles, your friends. Hey, listen, I'm moving. Can you help me take my TV, my 32-inch TV? People got 80-inch TVs now. 50-inch TVs is the bare minimum in most people's homes, right? At least 45. But this is what happens, right? And so I think about the laws, and maybe this really sheds light on what's going on. When the Central Park jogger case happened, a few things began to transpire. One was that they said we need to lower the age of criminalization so that we can funnel young people into adult prisons at younger and younger and younger ages. Because these criminals, this is what they said, right? These criminals are becoming younger and younger. And so the definitions that they have defined for the people that you are looking at, be careful who defines for you your definition if you are not defining for it for yourself. They call you super predators. Now, mind you, that came out of Hillary Clinton's mouth. She has since apologized. But they created super predator laws. And they never changed those super predator laws. Part of those laws is this thing that has just been mentioned about life without parole, LWOP. We were fighting against that all around the nation, especially for young people. How do you give a young person who scientifically has not fully developed until the age of perhaps 25? How do you give them life without parole? How do you not treat the whole person? Right? That's what you all do. That's what the education is all about. Understanding that this individual needs help. And what kind of help? Well, we need to figure that part out. But to give people a lock 'em up, throw away the key reality, it is destruction upon destruction. Because the worst thing about that idea is just like capitalism. I shouldn't say capitalism, I should say unrighteous capitalism. Because unrighteous capitalism will have people putting plastic in rice and selling it as rice. We've heard all kinds of social media noise about stuff like that. People taking food coloring and pouring it into strawberries to make them look redder, green beans to make them look greener. The way we bought our fruit years ago, everything was organic. You would eat a banana and the banana would have black dots in it. Those were seeds. I've never seen a seed in an organic banana today. You would walk by a fruit stand and you could smell the fruit. You don't smell fruit today. Maybe the organic is the closest thing that has been genetically altered to the real thing. But we have to fight. I mean, listen, we were able to fight before. We were able to win before. Now we have to fight again so that we could win again. Because we took our eyes off the prize. When the system was created and it said we the people, we have to take a full stop. Because when we think that we have rights, many of us, we've seen people stand up and say, I know my rights, I could be here. Videotape you. They might get manhandled. The very least, they might lose their life. I feared for my life. It looked like a gun. So we have to continue the fight. We have to understand where we are. We have to understand what we are, who we are, and why. And we have to realize that everything that we have been thinking about, the things that vibrate with us at its highest level, are the things that we have to be doing and dealing with. And so criminalization of a people is one of the most atrocious things that happens. And we need to deal with that. We need to fight against that. We need to be able to meet people on earth. And before we end, I want to share why I said we need to meet people on earth. Because I'll meet you in between Venus and Mars. In between Venus and Mars is the center of our attraction. Of those connected to the stars, hardly a fraction. It behooves man to work for the day when this will all end. Life is mortal, so follow the way of those heaven sent. Awaken and receive that which will give you life, or remain horizontal and never begin the flight. For the solution, I'll descend from amongst the stars, and I'll meet you in between Venus and Mars. Thank you.
Wow, truly amazing. Thank you so, so much for joining us tonight, for sharing your experience and your story. And before we close tonight, I'll hand the program off to our president, Dr. Mary Beth Cooper, who will close us out. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salaam. I have to tell you, I'm a wise woman in the sense that when you close with a poem like that, there's very little that I can say to add to it, except that your presence tonight has been incredibly meaningful. I wrote a lot of things down. I appreciated your shout out to your mother in terms of her support of you and your experience. I mean, from our perspective, it is all of the groups that brought you here tonight. And this was really, truly a collaboration with so many of our student clubs saying that this was important. And last year we collected, as you heard earlier, to watch the Netflix series, which paled in comparison to your comments tonight. I was moved by your thoughtfulness, your deep introspection about what it meant to you, but also moving forward. And so from our perspective at Springfield College, I want to tell you how much this has meant to us. It's been the highlight of my semester. And I want to thank you for being with us tonight. And I wish you and your family good health. And we look forward to seeing you somewhere in the future. I hope our paths cross.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm looking forward to that as well.
And keep your number 13 as a positive. For those of you that weren't unclear, we talked about the number 13, and for me, it is beholden because it is my greatest honor to be the 13th president here at this college, and we've got much work to do here, and you have now been a part of it. And so I thank you for your inspiration.
Well, thank you all for having me again. Thank you.
Okay, David, is there anything you want to add, or Paris, to one of our, I want to make sure that we close it out appropriately.
I think everything that has needed to be said has been said. And so on behalf of all the clubs and organizations, thank you, Dr. Salaam, for joining us tonight and sharing your wisdom, born of pain, but showing us all the promise of life. So
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Ramadan Mubarak.
Ramadan Kareem.
Be well.
Be well. Good night, all.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.